Good evening and welcome to the City of Brisbane Complete Street Safety Committee meeting for January 1st, 2022. This meeting is compliant with the Governor's Executive Order N29-20 issued on March 17, 2020, allowing for deviation of teleconferencing rules required by the Brown Act. The purpose of this is to provide the safest environment for staff, committee members, and the public while allowing for public participation. The public may participate via a Zoom web link and/or by phone or by using remote public comment option. The committee may take action on any item that is listed in the agenda. Public meeting videos. Members of the public may view the committee Complete Street Safety Committee meetings by logging into the Zoom meeting listed below. Complete Street Safety Committee meetings can also be viewed live and/or on demand via the city's YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/BrisbaneCA or on Comcast Channel 27. Archived videos may be replayed on the city's website, http://brisbaneca.org/meeting. Joined by Zoom. Topic: Complete Street Safety Committee meeting, June 1st, 2022, 6:30 p.m. Pacific Time. You can join this meeting at the following website, www.brisbaneca.org/CSSC-Zoom. The meeting ID is 976-0955-7422, and the passcode is 747389. You can also join by phone by calling 1-669-900-9128, and the meeting ID is 976-0955-7422. To address the committee, when an item you are interested in appears on the agenda, you may address the committee at that time. If the matter you are interested in is not on the committee's agenda, but is a matter that is within the committee's subject matter jurisdiction, you may address it under public comment. Remote public comment. Meeting participants are encouraged to submit public comments in writing in advance of the meeting. The following email will be monitored during the meeting, and public comments received will be read into the record during oral communications or during an item. That email is tsantoyo, that's TSANTOYO @ca.brisbane.ca.us. Could we go to the next page then? There we go. Special assistance. If you need special assistance to participate in this meeting, please contact Thomas Santoyo Velasquez at the email I just read, tsantoyo@brisbaneca.org, or a telephone number 415-259-1107. Notification in advance of the meeting will enable the city to make reasonable arrangements to ensure accessibility to this meeting. Okay, I think we are ready to start the meeting itself then. If we could begin with a roll call. First of all, I'll call the meeting to order, and if we could please have a roll call.
Committee Member Cabrera.
Here.
Chair Tainter.
Here.
And Committee Member Darius.
Here.
You want to call Committee Member Detmer? It's not here.
And then Committee Member Detmer.
Okay. Let's move on to adoption of the agenda. Could I have, first of all, is there any discussion or changes, additions, or deletions to the agenda as it was sent out from anyone? Could I then have a motion? Go ahead, Christian.
I make the motion to adopt the agenda.
I second
Great.
that.
Could I have it? All right. All in favor? Do we need a roll call on that or acclamation?
And we hear that we're supposed to do that, so. Cabrera,
Aye.
Painter,
Aye.
Wozniak.
Aye.
Okay. The agenda is adopted as it was published. Oral communications, do we have any any public members or any written communications from the public?
No emails or calls on my end.
Okay. Is there anyone online for the?
No, we are good.
Okay. Then let's move on to approval of the minutes. I assume everyone has had a chance to review the minutes. Are there any changes or deletions to the minutes of our last meeting? Okay. I had none. Could I have a motion then to approve the meetings for our meeting of May 2nd, 2022?
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay. A second? Christian, can you second that?
Oh, I second to approve the minute.
Okay. I guess we should take a roll call then to accept.
Sure. Cabrera,
Aye.
Painter,
Aye.
and Wozniak.
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are accepted as published. Let's move on to our old business then, which has been investigating the parking permit program. Over the last month, we have been looking at other cities that are of a similar size or geographic setting to Brisbane, and seeing just doing a quick, or not a quick, but an initial look at what permit programs they may or may not have in place and how those function. What I'd like to do now is for us to go through those and put them on screen if we could. And my thought was that each of us, as the investigator of each city that we did, might read through it, and then we would be able to discuss that. The committee would be able to discuss that, each city as we go through it.
Yeah, right here. I just went off the top of the list. We have Darius's research, so start there.
Okay. I like the way you bolded the headings, Darius. That was a good move.
Oh, thank you. It was a nice template. Yeah.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So the first thing I looked at was Colma. And one of the things I thought to add was just population, just to get a sense of sort of how big they are and sort of how many residents they have in general. And so they're about 1,500. The parking permit program is active currently, and it only applies to sort of a subset of streets. And that's, I guess, their more business district, which is the streets listed there. And I'm not too familiar with Colma. I tried looking around a lot, but obviously it seemed to me like that took up a large portion of sort of the business area, as well as some of the residential. And then I didn't see much about whether or not they could initiate their own program. Oh, sorry, Patrick, did you have a question there?
No, I did not.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I'll put on mute.
Yeah. I guess in terms of how many maximum permits, so it was each dwelling could have 4 permits, and then there was a clause about merchants that line the street could get pretty much 1 permit per principal vehicle of the business there, and then they could also get temporary permits. And then, so again, it's 4 permits per household, and those had to be registered to the Colma address to be able to live in that. And so as long as the license of the car owner and the registration were both to the vehicle registration and the license were both the same address, they get a permit. And this was in effect from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday. There was no specified time, the maximum amount of time a car could stay in that permitted zone, but there was a 2-hour maximum for everybody who did not have a permit. And then in terms of display, they should be displayed on the outside rear window of the driver's side of the vehicle, except for about some exceptions there. And so essentially, yeah, it was like a sticker. I didn't see any details in terms of funding around it, and then there's just the link to the website there. So that was sort of Colma. And then there's Fairfax.
Wait, let's discuss Colma. Let's stop
yeah.
for a moment and discuss each city as we've gone through it. Guys, any thoughts on this as to what they're doing or what might or might not apply to Brisbane?
I mean, my initial thought was it was sort of a subset of the area. It was their business districts or their more popular area. And so maybe it'd be worth it to go back to the map and sort of identify all those streets and kind of lay out where they are. But it seemed to me like it was, a subset of it. And then the 4 permits per resident I thought was per dwelling was quite generous. But again, I'm not sure how much that equates to density in that area.
Okay. Christian, any thoughts?
So, I mean, I just have a question. If you were able to perceive or ask them why they decided to do a parking permit system.
This is just research on the websites. I didn't really talk to anyone there specifically, but yeah.
No, I think it's pretty good.
Any other thoughts? I guess I looked at this as a pretty generous program. 4 permits per household, and then the guest permit, which is 14 days up to 15 times a year. That's more than 200 days of additional parking. So in essence, this is like 4 3/4 permits.
Yeah.
you know. But
there's
I think. Go ahead.
No, sorry. Go ahead. Please finish.
I just thought that I think regardless of what we decide in terms of number of permits per dwelling or household, I think a guest permit structure of some sort is important so that when people have, but again, that becomes an issue. But I think somehow to figure out a guest permit program for people who have visitors from out of town or kids returning from college for a period of time, whatever, is something that we should try to incorporate.
It should be noted those temporary permits don't apply to residents of Colma. That was interesting. It specifically says that. So as long as they don't, the cars aren't registered.
Oh,
does
it say that?
Yeah, there was a clause about that. The temporary permit cannot be used for residents' cars.
Oh, okay. I didn't catch that. Okay, so that's how they get around that. Okay, then that's a good qualifier to that.
And they were free parking permits also. Yeah, I'm not sure that was mentioned anywhere in this.
It's free.
It's free for the residents.
I don't know Colma that well either, other than the commercial and the internment areas that you drive through all the time. I'm trying to think where exactly is the housing in Colma. Maybe as you go down south on El Camino, south of Coles and all of that, maybe there's housing in there towards the gas stations and all. I'm not sure.
Maybe worth looking at a map later and doing a dive. Yeah, continue onward.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. So next city is Fairfax with about 7,600 residents, a little larger. Again, an active permit. And they have a downtown area where essentially everything is limited to either 15-minute parking or 2-hour parking based on sort of curb painted color. So it seemed to be a pretty small downtown area. Again, I didn't see any evidence of residents being able to initiate programs of any sort. And in the downtown area, it seemed to be, again, there weren't really residents there. So I think it's mostly merchant parking that could get parking passes for the day for themselves, essentially. Otherwise, yeah, there again, no sort of residential parking permit, just that little downtown strip. And if you keep scrolling down, it's 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. enforced, and it's 2-hour parking again. Otherwise, yeah. And then in the residential area, no permit, but there was sort of the 72-hour enforcement, which I think is pretty standard for cars. And then for non-permitted cars, it was 2-hour maximum, not 3. So that was a typo there. And then keep going. Yep. So that basically pretty much summarizes the Fairfax program. Again, They're just downtown, very sort of centralized, no other, sort of fees or anything other than for the merchants. And then I think there's regular enforcement. Any sort of thoughts on Fairfax?
Yeah. Any thoughts? Any comment, Christian? Any thoughts on that? Or
Well, I mean, it seems like we're gonna get different different flavors of cities, but so far the Colma and Fairfax is mainly targeted to businesses. Park. I mean, the parking permit is mainly targeted to business.
yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we move on to Los Altos then?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
As I say, on that note, the Fairfax, they have a larger population, did have a sort of smaller area where they were enforcing this, and smaller downtown than they sort of had. I did look at that map; they have that on their website there. But yeah, so that was kind of interesting to note.
I know this shows a lot more, but it's kind of hard to see. Come on.
Karen, could you repeat
that? I can do a single page.
Hard to see when it's shrunk down like this.
What did I do?
Okay.
Oh wait, no, that's not what I did.
Oh, that's good though. That's better.
Okay.
Great. And Los Altos is the third city there, and it's about 31,000. They do also have a parking permit. Again, sort of as Christian pointed out, it's a business area only permit, and they have a sort of more defined downtown area. Again, no evidence about residents initiating, and they didn't have. They sort of listed online that they had 1,400 total metered spots in their city parking lots. That includes sort of the metered spots and then also parking lots. I think they had 3 public parking lots, and so that was 1,400 total spaces available. And again, it's not a residential zone, so it's mostly for permits would have been for business owners and then guests and such. And so yeah, permits are valid for 1 day each, and it has to be written on ink of the day that it's valid for. Otherwise, parking is enforced 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Saturday. And again, not a residential zone, so it's all businesses. And you get, I guess, a little permit that you put on your bottom of your corner passenger windshield. And then the cost for the full booklet, it was 25 full day passes for $25. So it's $1 for day pass. And that's sort of any of the downtown area. So any thoughts or comments on Los Altos' program?
Chris?
I mean, that's a more bigger city, and then again, it's obviously target to business parking. Did they had any information in terms of how they enforced it?
It's just sort of standard. I think they have. I guess they didn't explicitly say that it was like tire. Some of the cities did say that they had like tire markings. This one did not explicitly say. I think they probably have a pretty strict 2-hour limit everywhere else. So I think they probably have sort of some enforcement there. I can look back into that, but I didn't note that here.
I agree with Christian. This looks like a commercial focus.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've had concerns expressed in Brisbane regarding the commercial parking, except what may be a bit of overflow. Karen?
Mm-hmm. We did study Visitation Avenue because of the issues on Visitation. So I think while it's a small part of the issue, I don't think you guys should exclude looking at that as a, business area that would have different requirements and different concerns.
Okay. Are there any parking restrictions at the moment, like 2-hour limits or anything like that on Visitation?
Yeah, there are not 2-hour limits, but there are a few 24-minute, and I don't know. We have Commander Garcia. Anything else?
Yeah, we do have 24-hour permitted. 24-hour permit. I can't talk. 24-hour limit, but it's based on a complaint basis. So as we get complaints, if there is an abuse of it, we will go out there and begin to look at the time they're spent out there.
Okay. I mean, some of these other cities probably have enough of an area to have a parking patrol going around and, enforcing people that are more than their 2-hour limit or whatever it might be.
I believe one of them explicitly said they had, an enforcement officer that was just for this particular purpose. And that may be Los Altos, in fact. But yeah, yeah, there definitely was a variety.
Okay. All right. Shall we move on to Newark then?
So Newark was the largest city here, but they actually didn't. I did not find a parking permit or any information online. So for them, so there's sort of no information here. Essentially, no. I cannot find any residential or business parking permits there. So nothing more there.
Okay. Nothing to discuss. That's an option too, though.
Yeah.
All right. What's the next?
We'll just start with Linda's here. I guess she's had her split up. It might make it easier to go through actually if they're separated. We'll start with Mill Valley.
And Patrick, you're on mute, just so you know. It sounds like you're in the middle of a sentence there.
No, I'm a noisy person, so I do that intentionally. Thank you, though.
Good. All right.
Christian, I think you were going to handle Linda's, right?
Yeah. So, obviously, I'm going to try to make justice of her work. She knows best how to present it, but she is doing Mill Valley, Menlo Park, and Sono. Like as you can see, she talked about Mill Valley parking, residential shopping permit. A resident shopper vehicle permit allows residents free parking of maximum allowable time limit at any of the city's parking meters, 7 days a week from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Once again, this is commercial oriented. Capacity of street, not information. Which street it applies to. Eligible zones. Residential parking permit may only be obtained by residents who live in the following specified residential parking areas. So it looks like there are some residential areas where they need a parking permit, and she lists them, for example, below. How many permits per household, residential business area, different times for residential, evening, enforcement, ticketing, funding, fees. So I guess maybe the parking permit system maybe gets funded by fees. That's what I get from that. For residents in the 941 zip code, permits are $50 for the first and second vehicle and $70 for the third and fourth vehicle. Wow. For residents in the 94965, 94920, and 94955 zip codes, permits are 70 and up. So it looks like there's a difference between zip code and the price of the permit. That's interesting. And if you lose your permit, you will pay $10 for it.
Okay. Any thoughts or comments?
I think that was interesting for sure, the tiered system and the sort of different zip codes. It'd be interesting to know which of those residential zones fall into which zip code, because they seem pretty small in terms of how many units they covered, but that might just be a sort of first glance at it. But that's interesting take.
Yeah, it almost seems like, you almost have to do, I'm not sure if you could do a online search on the streets, with Google Maps, or you have to do a little drive-by to appreciate the ones that have the residential permit, and just, look around the how they're structured and the sizes of the street, and more or less how many houses, just to get a sense of why they did it and how that is applicable to what they're doing.
I agree. It is interesting that they have a tiered system, and again, they're giving up to four permits per dwelling. I find that pretty generous, frankly, although I don't know what their whole parking situation there or is there. I mean,
yeah, I mean, Mill Valley is, it's my guess that these are more suburban areas, and the houses have the streets are probably bigger and there's more, space between them and so forth. But like I say, maybe it would be beneficial to try to, research that by Google Maps. So it'd be kind of hard to drive over there, but maybe Google Maps will give you an idea of the zip codes and the streets and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's right. The times I've driven through Mill Valley, I think there's greater separation between the houses than, say, we have in Brisbane, giving more street space potentially, parking. But the streets can be narrow too, if I remember correctly, in a lot of the places, and hilly like we have. All right, shall we move on to the next one then?
So we have Melon Park parking program. So the purpose of this chapter is to create a residential permit parking program, which is necessary to alleviate nuisance parking on certain residential streets in the city caused by out-of-area vehicles, and to provide reasonably available and convenient parking for the adjacent residents. So that's a little. I mean, their situation it probably applies to some of the bad actors that we're seeing here in Brisbane, I guess. That we suspect that some people park here and they catch an Uber to go to the airport and stuff like that. Capacity of street not mentioned. Which street it applies to. How many permits per household, residential, business area, different types of residential. Excuse me. Except as otherwise provided here, and permits may only be issued to residents. Each dwelling unit in the residence permit parking district should be eligible to receive a total of 3 permits and should be subject to the following requirements and restrictions. So, I mean, just to put this in content, some of the cities that we have been talking about, they're talking about 2 to 4 permits. And if you take the average street here in Brisbane, the average size of the street here in Brisbane, is that feasible? Just thinking.
Yes.
So completion of an application of a form provided by the traffic division. So payment of residential permit parking fee and enforcement. The traffic division of the police department should adopt procedures for processing application for residential permit parking district, which process should include a form of petition, review and recommendations regarding the appropriateness of the proposed district, and notice to residents of other streets and to business that might be affected by the proposed residential permit parking district. So they have a traffic division that is very involved in their parking permit system there. Funding, permit fees, the annual fees for the residential permit parking permit should be set for the city master fee schedule. So it looks like, some of the things to consider too is like what the cities have or they already have in terms of their infrastructure, because if they have if their infrastructure is pretty robust, it will be a lot easier for them to implement something like that. But if they're lean, is like Brisbane, you're going to be creating new departments or whatever, to accommodate how to enforce this and how to manage. So that's another thing to consider.
Okay, that's true.
Can
Darius,
you comment on that? Can you comment on that, Officer Garcia, from an enforcement perspective?
So in regards to, what was your question to that?
So I guess what I'm saying is some of these cities that we've been talking about, they might have, at least the big ones, they might have a good infrastructure where they have like a traffic division, bigger police department or why not. So for them to implement a parking permit, it's probably, probably more easy than another city that is running lean with just the minimum, you know?
That's correct. So one of the things that I would like to see is that the committee look into programs that have outside enforcement in terms of like contracts, and there are cities that do that. We currently do not have the infrastructure to enforce a permit program. I mean, like you said at Menlo Park, I used to work in Atherton, and Menlo Park had a busy business district, and they did literally have a traffic division that included meter maids and all that. We don't have that in our infrastructure. So I would ask the committee to make sure that we include that in regards to how we would be able to enforce it. And at this time, my only suggestion is that there are agencies or private companies that would do that for us. I believe, I'm not sure if San Bruno is on the list for your cities that you're looking into, but I believe San Bruno does that.
Oh, cool.
Another question for you then. Do we have an idea how the contractors charge? Do they do like a flat fee per year, per month, or whatever, or do they do it per ticket written, or how do they structure those?
That I don't know. I'm sure part of their fees that they charge are would include cost recovery for the program, and maybe subsidized somewhat by the city, depending on what their structure is like for the contract. But we would have to look into that further when you guys get closer to that benchmark.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts on Menlo Park?
Nothing in particular on my end. I mean, I think sort of the three, permits allotted per residence was also sort of in the same scope as we saw before. But yeah, not much to add there other than I think just adding more to the data file. I do have some questions for Officer Garcia, but I'm guessing they'll be later. Maybe we can ask some more questions, or should I ask a few now if I have a few? I don't know.
Yeah, no, feel free.
I guess, yeah. So from your perspective, is there a particular part of town that has maybe more of a parking problem? Is there a parking problem from your sort of viewpoint, or sort of what are the pain points there?
I mean, obviously the more dense areas like the older part of Brisbane does have it's more susceptible to that, smaller streets and, based on the infrastructure of the streets. And, the New Ridge obviously has more areas to park in. So yeah, there are. I mean, obviously you can see, you can drive up there and you can see open spots. Absolutely.
Yeah. Great, thanks.
If I could ask additionally on that, 2 years ago when we did our parking survey on a number of the streets, we went out and looked at cars parked, counted them, and we noticed some are parked not exactly 100% to the letter of the law. Like there's a setback from a driveway, et cetera, et cetera. And it kind of seemed like, well, they would push those limits, which I think might be necessary, but I'm just wondering how Brisbane Police kind of looks at that. Do we look at it kind of leniently, understanding the program or the problem, or do we try and be very strict, or what is your thoughts on that?
Well, we have always been based on complaint driven, and if there's a complaint that we do get, we do investigate it. There are areas that look like the setback is too close, or it may be in the right of way, but in actuality, it could infringe on private property. So, although some of it on its visual aspect look like it's not parked right, some of them we investigate, and actually it is legal parking for them. So, that's why we go off on complaint basis, only because there are some streets that don't have any issues, and there are streets that do, and that's what we generalize, and also based on stats.
And are complaints pretty frequent? Sorry. Are complaints frequent in terms of like, could you quantify? Is it daily? Is it weekly, monthly, sort of?
No,
issue?
I mean it's not that frequent. I mean, I'd say we get maybe between 5 and 7 a week, and a lot of the complaints are vehicles that are parked more than 72 hours. There are occasional, block drivers, but those get resolved pretty quickly. But most of them are within the 72-hour rule that, it's staying there a little too long.
And I know that
A few-
Commander Garcia doesn't have a hang up about this, but he is commander, not officer, just FYI.
Commander. Sorry.
Not
Sure.
good. Not good.
In terms of complaints, a few years ago, there was a major concern that we were having with the 72-hour parking issue. Was airport parking in the city. Do we still have a high percentage of that? Say, I mean, taking COVID into account, do we still have the major percentage you think of complaints is related to that, or other things?
Or let me ask this, are you able to ascertain that if you don't witness what happens?
Well, so in regards to that, we had those complaints and we encouraged residents to call when that happened. And I'd say within a 2-year span, we had 2 vehicles that we towed, and that was, we discovered that they were people that parked here and went to the airport. But we also discovered that they were friends of residents that were told to park there because they have a parking spot. I mean, they're not frequent at all. It does happen. During COVID, we didn't get any of that. And it's generally not happening now. I don't know if a lot of people have concerns about, obviously, as everyone knows, catalytic converter thefts are going up. So if you're gonna leave your car over 3 days, you may want to park it more secure areas. Not that we're not secure, but a little peace of mind and parking in a parking structure at the airport may be a peace of mind for them versus a deductible of $1,000, $500. That's just an inference on my end. But as far as factual, we haven't towed any vehicles that were actually airport parking. Recently,
Can I add something
year.
too?
Yeah.
Anecdotally, when we do street pavement maintenance or street resurfacing or slurry seals, and if we do a number of streets, we've also had people that are residents that took a trip and left their car on the street, and we had to deal with it because we had to get the cars moved. And we're required by the law to put signs out 72 hours ahead. But if that person had gone on a trip for a week, like, I'm not home, I can't move my car. And I don't know if we've actually ended up having to tow anyone, but it can happen with residents too.
Yes, absolutely. I agree.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts, or shall we continue to the next city then?
So, I was thinking when James did his survey and research, I'm not sure how much information or data did he get from, Commander Garcia sort of records, or in terms of what was asking, do you get this complaints daily or weekly or monthly, or maybe if there's a database that he wants to share with us just to add more data to our data, that will help us, shaping up on this program.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could definitely get that to Karen or Tomas and share that with you guys.
Well,
Thank you. I think that would be.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. What was collected by James and Patrick and Linda and I and Justin was just what cars were parked on the street on a weeknight. And we did a number of nights for the 6 random blocks that we chose. And we took down 3 digits of a license plate. So it didn't track anything about, complaints or citations or anything like that. Just who was on the street at that after work dinner time hour. And how full was, how impacted was the parking? How many spaces remained after that many cars were parked there? Which actually was calculated later. Justin did that later.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess I will pose the question to the committee if they feel that type of data would benefit us in our analysis and shaping, this city parking permit program that we're working on. I think from once, if they would, as he was saying, a lot of the people here, they know that the way the city is structured on their streets, that they know that they have to get very creative in terms of how they're going to park. And a lot of us don't complain because it's a reality. So that's just the fact of how we roll here. And so having the data from Commander Garcia in terms of complaints and so forth is not really an issue. But then again, when you look at the streets and they're all packed and so forth, you see that there might be an issue. But that's just the way the streets are, though.
And then I think when you get that data, committee members, you should also look at it side by side with the survey that we did that said 2/3 of people said there's a problem on my block. We want the city to do something about it. So there's probably a part of the population that doesn't want to have to call the police, but really wants, the inventory on the street to be easier to access for them.
No,
and not everybody wants to call, even if it's anonymous.
That is a great point. I think, having the data, we could correlate it and see if there is a linear relationship, or whatever in terms of the people that they want to see some sort of action, and the people that are just saying, just the fact that's how we are. This is how the streets are structured, and we sort of have to live with it.
I think when we were looking at it a couple of years ago, there were two main issues, at least at that time. One, there was concern about airport parking. And then the second concern was people who had what seemed to be an extraordinary amount of cars for one household. And some of those cars, this is only anecdotal information, but some of those cars seem to never move. And I think James mentioned he had a neighbor who had, I don't know, more than 5 or 6 cars, maybe. And and as I also recall, as we were doing the survey, every street was pretty much full to the brim, at least when I would do survey times. So, if that block happens to be your street, and I think this is what's driving the concern, if on your particular street or a particular street, there's a person that has 5 or 6 cars, and permits limited that to less cars parked on the street, then that would free up other places for citizens. Additionally, if a street is full to the brim, an airport parking person who comes in and parks there all of a sudden disturbs the equilibrium that's been established. I used to live in San Francisco and never parked in the same place twice, and sometimes walked a block, sometimes found a place in front, sometimes walked 3 blocks, and you just kind of get used to that, and that's an equilibrium. But then if it gets disturbed, and instead of walking a block, you're now walking 5 blocks or something, I think that's very concerning to people. So I think that's what was driving a lot of the concern. And I think the public is looking to somehow reduce the number of cars per household that are parked on the street. Not reduce the number of cars per household, but reduce the number that are potentially parked on the street. That's the gist I kind of got from the public surveys and from what council's general discussion was about.
No, that is a great point. And and it all comes back to to the parking permit ticket, so to speak, and that's going to weed out a lot of this this suspicions that we have that are creating the problem.
Yeah. And I can empathize with people. Where I live now has no parking issues, but I can empathize with people who feel they are greatly inconvenienced every single day where there's cars parked in front or on their block that never seem to move. And so these people are feeling they have to be calling every 3 days or whatever. And I empathize most definitely with how they feel and their concern with that. Whereas maybe a more automated process or a process that doesn't require public complaining, I think might be something the public would consider, based on the surveys, consider favorably.
I guess I had a question
Shall we
for
move?
Garcia. Sorry, quick question actually. I guess, is it sort of a repeat offender situation in terms of the people who are parking for too long with the car, or does it tend to be different cars around town, or sort of, repeat offenders leaving their cars longer than they should?
I think you're absolutely right. It's repeat offenders. And like Patrick said, if someone wants to buy 5 vehicles, there's no law stopping them from doing that, but it's going to end up on our streets. And, a parking permit program would address that if you were to limit the number of parking permits they get. So yes, generally, I say 80% of the times that those offenders have more than the amount of drivers per vehicle in their homes. The vehicles that are stored on their property, maybe the driveway, aren't being used, and then the ones that they fill over on the street may be used or not. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Shall we move on to the next city then?
Yes,
Linda's
think-
last one.
I think, yeah, not sure how to pronounce that. Sono.
Sorry?
Okay, so Sono, California. I'm not even sure where that is. The residential permit parking program is enacted to mitigate the parking of motor vehicles by non-residents upon roadways within unincorporated areas of Alameda County. This program allows a community to implement a preferential parking program to allow on-street parking for residents of a designated area who have purchased parking permits. Capacity of street, which street it applies to. The RPPP area must include at least 6 block fronts. 80% of the property in the proposed area must be residential. 2/3 of the area resident must support the program. 75% of all street parking space within the proposed area must be occupied during any 2 1-hour period between 8 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Qualifying, maybe?
Yeah, I'm not sure what to make out of that.
It sounds like it's a program that residents of the street would nominate their block or a block area for.
Yeah, right. It's almost like each street sort of says, we have a parking problem and we need to get parking permits. And then the city has like this criteria and they meet them and then they provide them. So that's how they do it. That's interesting.
Here's how many zones have sort of done this or implemented this. Is there any, could you scroll down maybe a little bit? I'm not sure there's any information on sort of how many places have implemented such a, maybe not. Very interesting.
So how many permits per household? So how many permits per household, residential and business, various different types of residential. You see, proof of residency within the designated residential permit parking area. I guess one thing to take out of this parking permit program is the parking permit seekers. They need to say the area that they need to park on. Because, you can't have somebody that lives in Mariposa parking somewhere in, Monterey or something. You know what I mean? What do you guys
That's a very
think?
good point. Yes. That if we say, I agree, Christian. Several people have said, let's do a parking permit, say, on their block. But then I think that just pushes cars to the next block over. This seems to address that by having a 6-block area. Yeah.
Yeah. But any person eligible to obtain a residential parking permit can acquire a visitor parking permit. However, no more than 6 visitor parking permits can be issued at any one time. There are 3 types of visitor parking permit, which are described as follows. 1-day visitor parking permit is valid under the date indicated upon the face of the permit. Now, a 14-day visitor parking and 1-year visitor parking. So, are we contemplating visitors parking permit? Is that something that we see that will happen? Depends on the household situation, right? Maybe if it's like a caregiver that comes and visits at the house, or I don't know, or a college kid that is back at home, maybe need a temporary parking. I don't know how a temporary visitor parking will play out here in Brisbane, but this talks a little bit about that and some of the criteria, how they're doing it.
That's a good question. And I think we have to somehow accommodate that for people who have out-of-town guests for a few days. We also have, I think, a fair number of Airbnb rentals in town, and I don't know how we would address those, because these parking permits that we've seen so far and the ones that I looked at all required a vehicle registration, except for the guest permits.
Yeah, because I think there might be some legitimate needs of temporary parking from people that that are not residents of Brisbane, and that's probably where the visitor parking will come into play.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this, on Sonoma?
Yeah, it's interesting that the different residents can sort of nominate, or I guess like opt in. And so I'd be curious to see how many different zones they have. But other than that, yeah, and then enforcement also, sort of who handles that once they nominate the zone. But a very interesting model indeed. And then the visitor parking is a great question. I think, yeah, there's some need for that as well. I think all the different programs so far have had some sort of visitor parking. I think the 1-year visitor parking is unique. I haven't seen that yet so far. That's interesting.
Yeah, because if you're having guests, how are those people, going to be able to park without getting in trouble?
Mm-hmm.
Do they need to get a guest permit parking, or a visitor parking permit?
Okay, I guess I'm curious if the visitor 1 year is like one of those hanging things that you can just transfer from vehicles, so that each resident will just have an extra, guest one that you can just kind of give to a friend or something. If they come to
Yes, that's a great point. Yeah,
That's what it sounds like, but that has lots of room for potential abuse, I think, right?
Well, I think it needs to be number, and that number needs to be cross-referenced to the household or the owner of that visitor parking permit, because I agree, people are going to abuse it, and there has to be some sort of criteria that the city will allow them to get a visitor parking permit.
Yeah, indeed. Any other thoughts or questions on this one? Shall we
And
move
then-
on to the next?
Yeah, last one's yours, Patrick.
Okay. Okay, so this is the city of Emeryville, and they do have an active program, but you know, Emeryville is the city there. You come off the Bay Bridge in the East Bay and turn north along, I guess that's 80. And it's kind of mostly, a lot of it is on the west side between the highway and the bay. But their program really seems to be specific to some business streets and then spillover parking in the residential areas adjacent to those commercial areas, commercial streets. So the permits apply to both residents and businesses. As to whether residents can initiate another program in their own neighborhoods, I don't know. And they do not specify the maximum number of permits, how the maximum number of permits are determined, but they do specify how many permits can be obtained. There's 3 permits per household at $60 a permit, and then they have a lower price for low-income households. A business can apply for 1 permit per business, also at $60. And then a guest permit, 1 per household or business, is $155. And I did not see it specified how long the guest permit would be good for, whether it was good. These are prices per year. Whether that permit was good all year or if it was good for just a specific, 2 weeks or whatever period of time. But I thought it interesting that they such a very significant price increase for a guest permit. And I guess that in a way discourages just wholesale guest permits to try and circumvent the system. The permits are vehicle specific. You have to provide the registration license plate number. It has to show that it's registered in the city of Emeryville. And then it's only active during the daytime, business hours, 8 to 5. It's not stated how long a car can be parked there, whether with a permit or without a permit. I found it interesting that they don't actually give you a tag. They register the license plate number, and I guess their police or their parking enforcement vehicles have a license plate scanner that, as they go through town, are able to scan the license plates automatically and know whether a vehicle is allowed to park there or not. That's kind of where Emeryville is at. Any thoughts or comments?
Well, I mean, the scanning of the license plate and sort of, having this, the scanner tells you or alert you that that car might be parked wrong, I think is pretty slick. And I read something about some technology that, and maybe Commander Garcia could talk more about that. I'm not sure if it was the luminary or the star that that is reading license plate or something like that. Can recall right now.
What was your question in regards to license plate readers?
So looks like this city has a scanner that scans the license plate, and then it sort of tells you, this car is not supposed to be in this street, or it's supposed to be in, or it's supposed to be on this street. So I was wondering if you're familiar with that technology, or if you're aware of it, or more or less, can you talk about the cost, I guess, or how complicated it will be to implement that?
So a lot of the companies that do contract for enforcement, their vehicles are equipped with license plate readers. And that corresponds with also a district court hearing that if they, so twofold, their vehicles are equipped with license plate readers. They can preload a license plate that, let's say, was given a permit for however long into their system, and based on GPS, as their vehicle drives around, they can ascertain whether that vehicle actually does have a permit for that area based on a geofence. So they can do that. On the second portion of it, the reason why license plate readers were brought into this industry was, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but in certain areas, if there's a 24-minute parking issue, and in the past, maids would come by and put a chalk mark on your vehicle, that has been challenged in a district court. That was a unlawful seizure of the vehicle because you're chalking the tire of the vehicle, that you're actually tampering with their vehicle. So that is a concern. So that what they did was they made license plate readers so that can geotag a license plate into the area that it belongs in, so that can work in that sense. And now that we're on it, some people don't like the fact that, let's say you had a neighborhood license plate program that encompasses 4 blocks. And let's say you're all about anonymity and you don't want someone to know where you live. That parking permit may distinguish what area you live in. So let's say if your vehicle was targeted or they saw your vehicle, they'd know exactly kind of what you're looking for. So some parking permit programs don't go by something visual in the back window because it may expose, or they may not want to be exposed, where they live and what area they can be looked for. So yes, the technology is available where vehicles can be equipped with a license plate reader, and they can inventory a certain area based on a geofence, whether that vehicle was given a permit program or not. And that would probably coincide with an automated forward-facing public version of, let's say you had a guest arrive at 1 a.m. in the morning, and you went on their website and said, I need a permit for this vehicle. They can upload that into their system automatically. And while that scan goes on at 3 in the morning, that vehicle would have already been given a permit because that automated system already put it in their system. So it may address several of those issues technology-wise. That is a lot, because if you put a person at a front desk, they may not be that 1 in the morning when your guests come in from LA, and you don't want them to get ticketed because you know the permit person comes by at 4 in the morning. So that may address that issue. So that way it's more automated for citizens.
Didn't the city just purchase some sort of a parking, or a license plate scanner or something? I read in, I don't know, the Luminary or somewhere, I think.
We are proposing a automated license plate reader in the parts of the city, more of a perimeter area, to deter crime, and so that we can basically find out when stolen vehicles are coming into town, or vehicles are getting stolen, and we can kind of figure out what areas they left or what time they left the city. Yeah, so we are going to propose that. There is a community engagement series meeting that everyone is invited to, that we are going to basically introduce the technology and then eventually go to council with it.
Okay, so those would be at fixed locations then, I guess, not roaming.
Those would be, and those would, in this facet of the protocol, it would not help this program at all. That would have to be a mobile license plate reader that would help this parking program, that would be either attached to a vehicle or with the company that would be enforcing it.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions on Emory?
So, I think with this technology and what Commander Garcia explained, from a enforcement, it should be so you have a wide spectrum how to enforce, or will give you a lot of options how to go about, managing the parking permit system that we want, in terms of, it will be easier to do visitors and so forth, and also for enforcing it. It almost sounds like if we do contract a company that has this technology, it could probably go around the town with this reader, and find out and enforce it fairly straightforward.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's the inventory and enforcement of it would be seamless.
Yeah, the issue and the permit and all that. I think it gives us a wide spectrum of option how to to provide to the parking permit program.
Darius, any thoughts or questions?
No, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think that's quite high tech and fancy. So, I think it's probably quite costly as well in terms of, but I'm quite interested in the service or who the providers of this service are. So it'll be interesting to look into like San Bruno, who they go through or other examples of that. Because I think that, yeah, very interesting.
Okay. Why don't we move on to the next city then? And this is San Bruno, and I did not run across their automated system when I was looking at their website. So I'm not sure exactly what part of the city it applies to. And I think obviously this is one that we should go back and look at in more detail and maybe even speak directly with city personnel, city staff. Because what I found on their website was that their parking program, their permit program was only initiated outside of commercial streets for their meters and such, was to be initiated by a resident petition, the main reason being overflow parking from the commercial streets onto the residential streets. And what I saw seemed to be 100% resident initiated. And the process was that residents would go to their neighbors and get a petition. They needed to have at least 51% of the people on a block or in a multi-block area sign on that they were requesting a permit. There was a filing fee. And then the city staff would do an official poll of the residents of the dwellings in that specified area. And the city criteria was more strict. They needed to have a 50% response. In other words, at least half of the residents had to vote on this. And then of those, they needed to have 67% approve it. So 50% voting, and then 2/3 of those voting approving the permit program. And then it would go to council to establish a permit district and the hours and the costs that would be applied for the permit. The way they set the number of permits, I thought was interesting. First of all, it was a maximum per dwelling of 2 permits. However, whether it was 1 or 2, they would base that on how much on-street parking was actually available within the permit district. So they were actually, this is the only one that I ran across, and I think of our research, the only one we've seen so far that actually looks at a capacity question in terms of determining then how many permits will be issued. Then going beyond that, interestingly enough, in terms of the permits, a maximum of 2 per residential dwelling, but they would not include ADU. So if someone had converted a garage or constructed an ADU in their backyard or as an add-on or something, that ADU would not be given its own permit. It had to, whatever permit the ADU would receive had to come out of the allotment of the entire primary dwelling. And then there was no statement on guest permits. In terms of whether they're vehicle specific, obviously from what Commander Garcia is telling us, they must be, because they're using the license plate scanner, but I didn't find that information myself. And it did not say I could not find how long they were allowed to park, whether permitted or not permitted.
Did you see any information, Patrick? Yeah, did you see any information about sort of how many districts or how large a district could be, or small maybe? Like, was it a minimum of a couple blocks or something?
I did not see that. Mm-hmm. I didn't see that. And I think this is an interesting program. They're using interesting technology. It seems to be resident initiated, which I think might serve us here in Brisbane. I think this is one we should definitely look more in depth into. Maybe staff can help us with this on, how we can talk to their city directly and so forth. I think there's a whole lot of lessons we might be able to gather, learn from how they are doing things that could apply to us. But I did not find it. No, it was not. I did not see it readily on their website.
Patrick, did they have readily available how many available parking spaces there were in the permit area? Was that like visible?
No, it did not. And in fact, they didn't even define where the permit areas were. So, it led me to think or question whether they had actually any residential permit programs in effect or not. I just wasn't sure. And maybe they don't update their webpage, often enough to reflect this. But what it did say is that city staff would go out when a permit was applied for and met the 50% criteria. The city staff would go out and actually survey, quote unquote, survey the street to determine how many, the area, to determine how many parking spaces were available before they would do the calculation then on how many permits per dwelling.
Patrick, if I may, I also looked into San Bruno's only because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, but their program is in the infancy stages. I think as of earlier this year, they had gone to council to propose the permit program and how it was going to be enforced through a local company called LAZ. So I don't know if it's actually launched. In regards to the areas, I looked extensively on their website, and you're right, it doesn't exactly say how many streets are. But I think the application, they could define what they wanted included in that, and however big they wanted it, but they still needed a 50+1, like you said, to get that approved. So, but yeah, I think there are a lot of details in their permit program that we could definitely benefit from by looking at them. But they even go as far as defining how long a space should be if you're going to consider it for a car. So
that's all good information. If they're in their infancy, maybe that's why, or they're just the beginning, early phases. That might be why not a lot of information is on the website yet.
That's correct. And I believe San Bruno PD is aware of that district ruling about chalking vehicles and putting marks on vehicles. That's why I believe LAZ parking does have that technology. But again, I could be wrong. We'd have to confirm that.
I guess a question I would have on a scanner, if cars are parked in parallel, as opposed to nose-in parking, so like on Visitation, if you drive down Visitation because the cars on the east side or nose in parking, you can, like in front of the library and such, you can easily see the license plates.
Correct.
But on the residential streets where it's nose to tail, are the readers able to look kind of sideways into that gap? And
so basically, a license plate reader reads the reflection that the camera reflects off of the numbers. That's why if you look at a DMV license plate, it's reflectivized. It doesn't actually take a picture. So if the human eye can see the numbers or letters, as long as there's a gap that the camera can see it, it would be able to read it because it digitizes the image. It might be their cameras may be on also on a boom.
Okay. Because I think our cars. Okay.
So if they needed to,
I think
get
that
a
would
read
be
on it,
important.
they could extend it.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any thoughts, comments on San Bruno, guys?
So, I'm wondering if there's a way of finding out, how many companies are out there that they provide this service, and then if there's any benefit to try to contact some of them, because sometimes if they want your business, they could do a lot of the footwork that we're doing here too. In terms of they might have some sophisticated way of surveying in the streets to find out the sizes, and then give you a number of how many cars can that street hold, and therefore you divide that among the households, or they have since they do this, they might have a lot of information that might be good to start talking to some of them. And in terms of this technology, from a business perspective, it might be expensive, but down the road, it might be. I mean, from the point that we're starting from scratch to implement this parking permit program. So it might be beneficial to start, with a high-tech option, because down the road, that's the way that you're going to go. So that's another thing to consider, because why are you going to have a person doing stuff that you could have an automated system do most of it? It's more visible and stuff like that.
So if I could also dovetail on that, so when you hire a company to contract this out, if you look at San Bruno's platform, a neighborhood can opt in, but then if they decide to opt out of it on the second year or third year, they could. It would be extremely difficult for us to build an infrastructure within our city staff, including buying the vehicles, buying the technology, and then years from now, everyone says, we don't want the program anymore. I mean, that would be extremely difficult to uphold. So, I mean, if you went with a company and they charge you on a yearly basis or a contractual basis, you can literally cancel the service if you decide to opt out on the program. So that's one thing that definitely needs to be considered. And I'll say from personal experience right now, it's very difficult to have police officers, let alone parking meter people. So if we can get a company to do this program would be up and running much faster if and when council agrees a green light, or the citizens can give a green light to this.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Plus, also, if you bought a technology, it can become obsolete. But if you buy a contract, that contractor has to keep it up to date.
That's correct.
I agree. I think might be able to tell us something that.
Could you repeat that, Patrick? You're breaking up a little bit. Oh, yeah. I guess I'll add in. Yeah, I think definitely interesting to follow up on San Bruno and LAZ. Was it there? That could be an interesting company, as well as I'm sure some other vendors. But definitely worth sort of following up on that. I do like that it sort of can be zone initiated by residents. That's definitely also an attractive feature there. But yeah, that's about my own thoughts there.
I'll restate since I broke up. Yes, I agree. And I think maybe a service company probably has learned some lessons that they might be able to help us with on things we have not considered or thought about yet. It might be good to maybe start reaching out to them on an exploratory basis. Would it be premature to do that, Karen and Commander Garcia? Or, I mean, just as an general interest basis?
I'm not sure. I guess I'd ask Commander Garcia if these types of contractors do anything other than just the enforcement piece. Depending, it may or may not be early to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be done. I mean, you guys still have obviously some heavy lifting that to pull together, and then with all the great work you guys have done, you guys can obviously mold something together that you guys want to present, and then you guys could definitely go to these companies and say, hey, this is what we want, this is what our program will be or would want to be, and see if they can accommodate it. And I'm sure at that point, then they can tell us if they've learned any lessons. Obviously, there's still other cities that can be looked into, but what I can do is I have a cohort at San Bruno that I can look into what companies they've used or they looked at. That way, we can take some of that lifting out of the way, and then I can present that to you guys, and maybe you guys can go out to those companies and see what services they can offer. So that would be helpful. We appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely.
Because they're not going to recommend how many permits you give per household, or they're not in the business of doing that, I would think, right?
Yeah, they're definitely gonna. I mean, obviously, they will give you best practices from what they've learned, but at the same time, they're at your disposal. This is your contract. So whatever this committee pulls together and what they want this to look like, any of these companies, I'm sure, would adhere to that and mold if they can service it that way, they would.
Okay. I see we have somebody on chat that says hello, a person by the name of Johnny. I don't know if there's a member of the public that is entered the meeting that wants to speak.
I'm gonna suspect that this is a troll if they don't provide something meaningful in the chat. I don't think we want to give them the microphone.
Okay.
Are they even still in, Tomas?
No, they were in for like a second and then left. They're not in there. I see the message too, but they said that and left.
Okay. Why don't we move on then to the final city then?
Okay.
Okay, this is Sausalito, and before I started this, I thought Sausalito might be very informative for us because geographically it's a city very analogous to Brisbane. They're on a steep hillside, they have narrow streets, no sidewalks, no curbs on those streets. Houses in many places are rather close together, which is much of Brisbane. But what I found is that the program that they have is really targeted to the lower areas of town, closer to Broadway, their commercial street, which is really a tourist magnet, especially prior to COVID times. And so their program, it applies to 3 residential areas, primarily for the purpose of controlling overflow tourist parking. And then there is, in those areas, some limited residential parking. But it is mainly to limit tourist overflow. And I'm sure all of us have tried to park over there, and it is a headache. At one time or another, we've tried it. Whether residents can initiate something or not is unknown. The maximum number of permits, how the maximum number of permits is determined is not specified, but they do give a total of 4 permits per household at $35 per permit. And then they give 2 guest permits per household per year. How long those permits are good for is not stated. The permits are vehicle specific and they are in effect 24/7. So whether it's daytime or 2 a.m. in the morning, that permit is in effect. Now, a car that has a permit can remain in the parking space up to 72 hours. But if the car does not have a permit, it's limited to 2 hours. So I found this rather interesting in that having a permit did not give the permit holder the permission to just leave the car parked in the same location for days, weeks, or whatever on end, which from our survey of Brisbane residents is one of the concerns, that some residents park vehicles and leave them unmoved for extended periods of time. And as Commander Garcia said, the city responds to residential complaints for a vehicle over parking. So this very clearly codifies that as part of the permit, that your vehicle is still limited to the 72-hour maximum parking permit. The program works by a bumper sticker. It's put on the rear left-hand bumper on the car so that it must be visible, presuming that a car parks normally with the flow of traffic. That would be visible from anyone in the street passing by. Funding beyond the permit cost is unknown. How much the program costs to operate is unknown. Thoughts or comments?
So Patrick, I'm going to speak on the 72-hour rule real quick, just to make it clear out there that just because the permit program's in place does not negate the California Vehicle Code. They would still be subject to 72 hours unless it was specified by the municipal code, they would still apply.
Okay, that's good to know. I didn't know that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Christian,
the cost here is quite low. I think we've seen a range go from anywhere from like 100 to for free, and this is sort of right in the middle. So that is just sort of another data point for us. But yeah, I think, and then again, for residents, seems to be another common sort of, we've seen 2, 4, 3 different variants. But I think it's very interesting and sort of applicable, like you mentioned in the beginning, given the sort of topography and landscape. So yeah.
Christian, any thoughts?
So in terms of the 72 hours, I'm not clear with that. So even if you have a permit, and then if, let's say you have your car parked in front of your house and you go on vacation, obviously your car's gonna be there more than 72 hours. So what will happen in that case?
We would enforce it just like we do now, based on the California Vehicle Code. It would get a tag, and if we get 72 hours, that's it in one spot, it would still get towed. It doesn't negate the vehicle code.
But even when it's in front of your driveway?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're on public roadway, yes.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, a permit program can't negate the vehicle code rules.
That's an interesting point, is that right now you're doing that on a complaint basis. And if there were a permit program, and had we selected enforcement just for the permit program or for any violation on a street, I think that's something to consider in terms of what the committee wants to propose.
Correct. And that's something that, again, after you gather all information, is that something that you want the company to let us know? Hey, this vehicle's been scanned 3 times or 4 times and it's in the same spot. Or are we just looking for compliance within the area of designated parking permit? And then we can still, like we have before, go on complaint basis. So you can tailor this program however you choose or council chooses to do so. I mean, you can.
I would think.
I mean, you can have them so they tell you if it's parked more than 72 hours, so it's your watchdog, or they can still be complaint basis.
I think one of the advantages of this the scanner system is that it automatically keeps track of that for us, right? The 70, how long a car has been there, and if that's the law, and parking for extended periods is one of the Brisbane residents' concern, then I think probably we should be addressing that as part of or enforcing that as part of the program.
That's definitely something that at your direction you could go with, yes.
So what would be a an option from a resident that goes on vacation? I mean, what will happen? I mean, how is supposed to park the car, I guess?
So in exigent circumstances, we have granted people, let's say they have to go on a trip because they have a sick grandmother in LA and they can't put their car somewhere else for the time being. They would call us. We would review their request, and if we decided yes, they would be given, let's say, 96 hours, we could then have a conduit to the parking enforcement and tell them, hey, this vehicle has been given 96 hours or whatever, so that they would not ear tag that and then give that report back to us. So, and we still do that now. If there's an exigency that someone, let's say, went on a trip and they were only supposed to go on for 2 days, and all of a sudden a snowstorm trapped them in Chicago, they could call us, and obviously we'd make accommodations for that.
Got it. It's almost like your mail. You notify them to keep the mail to your back.
Correct, and there would be obviously a threshold or criteria in how we grant those. It wouldn't just be because someone called.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, and any further discussion on the cities or thoughts on the cities we have surveyed so far?
So, I mean, another quick technological question or technology question. So, in addition to plate reader scanners, do you know if there's a system where they give you a fab and then it's almost like similar to the thing that they give you to pass the toll, and then that throws the signals and sort of you keep track it that way, like a GPS fab in your car.
So yes, there are communities that what they do is they give basically a transparent sticker like on the headlight, and this emits a bit long enough signal, or it emits some signal where a reader could pick it up. So yeah, it could be done in that fashion as well versus license plates. Obviously there's a couple sub options, and yes, some stickers can have transponders in them. Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments before we start planning our next steps then?
So I'm gonna just put this out there only because I could see this turning out into something a little different. I mean, not different, but some of these cities so Redwood City is another city that has a permit program, and they kind of mirror what San Bruno does in terms of a neighborhood would have to petition for a certain amount of blocks. One thing to consider is that when you're in a densely populated area, like let's say downtown Brisbane, if there was several streets that agreed on it, you have to be concerned that there's going to be push out of those other vehicles that can't get permits into other streets that spill out. So maybe a citywide program versus, certain 2 streets, and the 2 streets are great, but then the other streets are impacted. So something that definitely to consider down the line as you're putting together basically your menu of items that you guys would like to include in your recommendations. Because those items do happen, because even on street sweeping days, when we when we clear visitation and we enforced it back in the day, and people would park all on other streets, it would impact other streets. So you don't want a parking permit program to do that as well.
Agreed. I think that's potentially a very big problem for if it's just one block or two blocks that requests a permit. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've got a good understanding of what other cities are doing, and I think we've gotten some ideas on what might apply, as well as some areas that we need or cities that we want to look into in more detail, specifically what is San Bruno doing. I think it's time for us that we should start planning what we should be doing as our next steps to be bringing this to a closure in the fall. And I think at our last meeting, some of the areas that we had talked about were determining street capacities, and how many permits we should have per household, as well as digging into what costs of this program might be. So I think it's probably time for us to start looking at that. And probably for us, the most critical step is the capacity of our streets. I'm not sure how exactly we survey that without walking every street or counting parking spaces on Google Maps. But that might be what we have to do. Karen, I guess Justin did this before, 2 years ago for our, when we were doing the surveys. He somehow went out and determined how many parking spaces were available on each street that we had looked at.
Yeah, I think he used Google Maps. He had done something similar in college, so he'd I'll look up what he did, but I think before we count the spaces, I mean, that doesn't seem like the first step, is are we going to do it based on that, or are we going to allow a certain number per household? Are we going to base it on whether someone has off-street parking or not? Like, I think still a bit to flesh out. I mean, if you ask me, I think it was not disappointing, but unfortunate that some of these were business ones, and I think it's worth looking at if we do know, like the Redwood City, or if there are a couple more that are residential. Again, we didn't study San Francisco; they're a big city, but it is a residential parking program largely, and have specific data that fits our need. Although we are kind of looking at Visitation Avenue also, there have been concerns and complaints, and I don't know, since we've got Commander Garcia tonight, what is your knowledge of Visitation? Are there generally concerns or complaints about being able to park on Visitation and access the businesses there?
Not that I have been aware of in the last year. I think that hasn't been an issue, but again, although you guys did also do business areas, I think that these areas could be affected eventually, because of if you were to pick, residential streets only, and then you left the commercial district alone, that could be a haven for parking at night with people without parking. So something you definitely think about.
Well, there was that desire to rent a lot across from the Brisbane Inn, so that was based on some access to downtown being difficult.
Correct.
I don't know the details of that, but I could look into that.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Okay. Should we look at San Francisco and Redwood City then? What do you guys think? Okay. Darius,
yeah,
Christian?
So I think that I think this was a great move to to have research other cities, and definitely, there's probably more cities out there that we could still tap into. But I did talk to Mayor Pauline, and one of the things that that I brought up was, because I know that in the past what they had said was for all of us to tackle one project at a time. And this is one project, but this project has many components. And I know that we are a small group, but if we keep, if all of us keep being concentrated on doing one task for the project, we're going to extend the duration to complete the project substantially. So maybe we should probably, have us work on different components. And the more data we have, at this point, I feel also that we should start digging into, doing some field work. And maybe some of us to start figuring out what would be the best way to start serving those streets and get some sort of numbers of how many, to understand our capacity better. And obviously other people could still research more cities and maybe, these other contractors. But then when we get together, we will have, more data to share and start shaping up maybe a report of all the findings to have a systematically approach, and we're not going and recycling the same ideas and so forth.
Karen?
Yeah, I had a thought while Christian was kind of talking about the big picture, and I feel like you guys have collected some good data. There's maybe a little bit more that would help kind of focus on the residential, but again, we're not just thinking about residential, but it is the majority of the streets that have been brought up as concerns. Is that maybe staff should try to organize this a bit for you guys? I mean, I think what other cities are doing, and maybe we can put those options together. Do we want to go block by block? Do we want to go district by district? Do we want to go citywide? Do we want to base the permits on capacity? Do we want to base it on off-street parking existing? And then bring that back to kind of in an organized way so that the committee can then focus on what policy recommendations they want to pursue. Like, I think it needs a little organization. Maybe we can help with that. And we might be able to you, Patrick, and review it ahead of the next meeting. That would probably be good. And I also want to suggest that people look at the ordinance that was adopted, I don't know, in 2000 or the late 1990s, that is set up that a neighborhood can, if they have 70% of the people interested, they can petition for a permit program on their street. And we would have to put one together for them and kind of see if, maybe you like that ordinance, maybe you want to recommend a change to that ordinance. So kind of bring forward something structured for you guys to look at, because I think that's what we want committee. I mean, it was great that you did this research and definitely helped us, but we want you guys to start, not necessarily be talking to staff at other cities, but make policy recommendations that fit our situation in Brisbane.
Has anyone ever used that ordinance before? Sorry, has anyone ever tried to petition or actively attempted to even?
No, and I staffed. It was a traffic advisory committee many years ago. They only met quarterly, and commander at the time, I think, also staffed it. And parking was an issue all those years ago, and we did a survey which Patrick looked at when we developed a more recent survey, looked at the data, and we got again a big response. 200-300 people responded, but it was a little bit more of, we don't want big government, we don't want to have to go and register for a permit. But people still did think there was a problem, and there were a couple of streets that had kind of a large number of respondents that said, I'm interested in that. And the council just wasn't ready to go there as to take, it wasn't an overwhelming majority like this.
Yeah,
but in a lot,
Okay, it looks like Patrick is muted.
Go ahead, Chris. No, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
Okay, so you know, I think at the beginning we discussed that you know, this project is going to have, so in addition to having, you know, different components, it's going to have different phases. So right now we sort of want to get to a point where we feel we've done like 80% of the research and not just do it and organize it in a way. And I think for that research, we also need to involve some field data, you know. So then you might go into what you're talking about, Karen, the public outreach. And that's something that when we do our research, I think we need to circle back with council, because I don't want to, you know, that's something that they probably have a better understanding how to approach that, the public outreach, and or make that decision. You know, do we go ahead and implement the, you know, the parking permit, or do we throw it for a vote? Right now, I think the consensus is if we throw it for a vote, it's going to get voted out no, and then we're still going to have the problem. So the city has the authority to do the you know, this program without throwing it to a vote. So, you know, I think if we keep at it at the research and organize it, and then circle back with council, and then they will look at that to make, you know, they will decide for them to make that decision, and then look at the feasibility too. You know, do we have a budget for this? I mean, those are questions down the road.
Yeah, and that's what I'm proposing. Staff organize that and bring it back in a way that you guys can look at recommendations. And yes, you guys will make a recommendation as a committee, but the majority or all of you unanimously wants to recommend, and then it will go to council formally at a, you know, just to clarify, like the mayor has a lot of ideas, but you need a majority of the council to decide, yes, we want to implement A, B, or C. If it's different than the program that exists in the ordinance now.
Karen, can you send us that ordinance? I mean, we don't need it this second, obviously, but it would be good for us to have that, whether a link to where it is on the website, city website, or
yeah,
the actual.
The whole municipal code is on the city website, and you can probably just search, but I will send you a specific link to it. Yeah.
Thank you. Darius, any thoughts on your part on where we might head from here?
No, I think like Karen's idea, trying to organize it more and helping us along that aspect. So that, you know, I think that sounds reasonable to me in terms of this additional next steps as well.
I agree, Karen. I think your idea is well founded. Would you want to include Redwood City data and San Francisco data as well, or do you have that already, or how would you approach that?
I would like to, because I think that some of that stuff that's business focused doesn't really fit most of what you're looking at. So I'd like to see a little bit more of the residential, yeah.
Okay. I'm happy to take one of those cities and get it to Karen.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Quickly. Anybody, I mean, I'll do both if necessary, but anybody else want to take one of the other cities?
So, you know, there was a little confusion at the beginning with that list. I'm still working on my cities, and that's San Rafael, Dublin, and Atherton. And I could probably look at those and see if they are more, if they have a parking permit, more business oriented, and maybe not, you know, maybe is, so not do any work on that and get the ones that are more residential oriented. And I could probably work with you on that, Pat.
That sounds great. Darius, do you have time to do one of the cities?
Right, I probably take a neighborhood or two in the city. I can look around sort of neighborhood-wise in SF in terms of what has permits that could be quite applicable in terms of maybe, you know, streets that are a little bit more windy and sort of residential. So yeah, I could take a stab at some of the districts up there potentially.
Which one? So are you
something in the
saying
city and San Francisco? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming San Francisco is probably more by either by like sort of neighborhood or district or something. And so I'd probably take a, you know, one or two of those and do an assessment there.
Okay, then I'll take Redwood City. what do you say we get this back to Karen? This is the first, Karen, if we get it back, you say by the 10th, does that give you enough time to work your side of things?
Yeah, I think that's good. And we actually have a 5 Wednesday month, so that's fine.
Oh, okay, bonus.
Yeah.
Hey, Karen,
Okay.
I'm not sure if we're going to talk about this later on. I think Tomas mentioned it, but in terms of the way you to organize the data, I was wondering if I could have a quick Zoom meeting with you and Tomas and sort of go over themes. I know that there are some concerns in terms of the Brown Act, but there are some features on Teams that you could enable just view access to all of us, and then you guys feel on control managing the data. But the way that is organized in the accessibility, I think is going to make it a lot easier for a lot of us.
I do have an update on that, not final answer, but I have an update. So when we get to staff updates, probably makes the most sense.
All right, that's fine then.
If I might summarize,
Go ahead.
Summarize our next steps. We are going to finalize the last city's review between the three of us. Karen, we will get that to Karen by June 10th, and then staff will organize all of the options that the cities have and summarize it for us so that we can start looking at it from a policy perspective at the next meeting. At the same time, I think if we could find out how Justin did his street capacity analysis, parking capacity, so that we could know that at the next meeting as well, I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I can definitely do that too, because it's something I also did that rings a bell from college, so I don't think it should be too crazy. So I can get on that.
Okay.
That wasn't on your resume. I didn't know that.
Is that how to come with a method to measure cars in a street using Google Maps? Is that what you guys talking about?
Well, we're trying to figure out what was done in the past and what is an acceptable way. So I don't have that. We'll have the answer at the next meeting for you.
Yeah, and so okay.
But we might have an answer on methodology to use, right?
Yeah.
So we're not doing anything in terms of working on capacity yet?
I think you still need to decide as a committee if your recommendation is based on capacity in the street or not, which staff's going to put that together for you to have a robust discussion at the July meeting. Does that make sense? I mean, in your mind, you want to consider capacity, but I don't think the full committee has come to that conclusion yet.
Well, is that I mean, I feel that's one of the main issues. The way
No, I understand what you're saying, but you looked at a number of cities, and some of them do, and some of them don't. Some of them issue 2, no matter what, 4, no matter what. So it's not a done deal, I think, at this point, that based on capacity.
I don't know. I mean, that from and this is just my opinion. From what I gather from the cities that we review and from Brisbane, in terms of and from the technology that is out there, this is not going to be one of those where you're going to say, okay, so Monterey Street is going to have 4 permits per house. It's going to be more driven like Monterey Street measures such, and and it has this amount of houses. Therefore, you're going to have 2 permit per car, but so a lot of it is going to be driven by what you are able to put in that particular street. It's not going to be one size fits all, in my opinion.
Okay, well, I guess in the interest of time, it's hard to go deep into this now. Do you agree, Patrick?
I would agree. I think it's a complex issue because the other side of that would be if one part of town gets 3 permits and 2 blocks over, they're only allowed 2 permits. I think we might have some disagreement from the residents on that approach as well. So I think we have to think through this very carefully on how we determine the number of permits, because also people don't necessarily, just like you don't have a right to the parking space in front of your particular house, people do have the right to park on the next block over and so forth. So if, capacity and permits per dwelling becomes, I think, a complex issue that takes a fair deal of discussion on our. We're at 8:30 almost, which is our supposed to be stopping time. I know we have some things to work on, and I think we probably have enough that maybe we should move on to the next agenda item, which is, I think, new business.
And we have no new business.
Okay, how about then staff update?
Yeah, so I just wanted to update on the file sharing issue, and I apologize that it's not resolved. I was out yesterday and today, and I didn't hear back from the city clerk, but what I did hear is that they're planning to pilot this committee and the equity idea, I'm blanking on what it stands for right now, that committee using number 1, city email addresses, and using SharePoint to share files. And our IT department recommended that because Teams has an ability to direct message and to have conversations amongst each other, and there just were concerns about the Brown Act. And the city attorney gave me a memo to forward to you guys, but it was just today, so I haven't done that yet. So the plan is to issue you all a city email address, and that was also kind of separate your personal business from your city business. That was already a plan happening. And then give you access to SharePoint, which is a web portal where the files relative to the committee can be stored. So basically, I think we'll meet the goal. There's also business cards for each of you that identify you as a Complete Streets Safety Committee member. So, and with emails, what I understand from the city clerk is that she's going to need a face-to-face with each of you to issue the password. They're reluctant to send you a password to the city's SharePoint site over email for security reasons. So these steps, I hope we'll have very soon. Say again? I know you did, and I'm not sure. I think they were trying to put CSSC in the email address, so you may still get another one.
Okay, because this week I then got an invitation to join the Complete Streets SharePoint Microsoft Teams group. And so I did sign into that, and I saw the whole committee, as well as yourself, Tomas, Adriana, and I, maybe Commander Garcia was in there as well.
And that wasn't what Christian did?
I'm sorry, say that.
Was that what Christian had been trying to set up? Or was that?
No, this was city sponsored, and it had the city email addresses for all of the committees. It actually looked quite nice. It was quite good. It had OneNote, it had SharePoint, Office, the Office apps and.
Well, I'm going to be in the office tomorrow, so I will verify, and you'll be hearing very soon, all the rest of you, about your city email address. I know I said I'd try to resolve it last month, and it's been slow going.
Okay, but it sounds like it's progressing, so I think that's good.
Yes. I think they wanted to offer some training on Outlook and if you upload it on a device or, all those things too. So that was the main update that I had.
Okay, anything, let's move on then to chair and committee member matters. Any updates or items from any of the committee members?
Nothing from me.
Likewise, nothing from me.
The only thing I had was Tomas sent you out I subscribed to a couple of Complete Street emails, and Tomas sent you the National Complete Streets, one of their newsletters for you to consider. As I receive others, I'll send them to you as well. I would encourage you to sign on to their email list. They do have, not all the time, but periodically, they do have good information that helps us keep abreast of what's happening nationwide. Other than that, I think there's nothing else to discuss. Anybody have anything else to discuss? Karen, Justin, Christian, Barry, Tomas, Commander Garcia. All right, so let's conclude the meeting then. Our next meeting is July 6th. Could I have a motion to bring our meeting to an end?
I move to bring the meeting to an end.
Second,
I second the motion.
all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your
Thank you.
participation. Appreciate it. Good night, all. Good night.
Bye.